Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
All the Israelis I know are trying to leave, but there are some Israelis who are thinking to stay overnight in Sinai and leave tomorrow. The Israeli government emphasizes that Israelis should leave immediately now. As we know, Egyptian bureaucracy is slow going. Many people didn't take their passports along and will have problems to leave. Until now, they're trying to leave and they're not getting any special treatment to expedite their departure. Because of the situation, it's going to be very slow and hard to get the help that is needed to the area. Just now an ambulance is passing with a patient with broken bones. We don't know how many more people were wounded in Sinai. You can see the ambulances streaming out all the time. A lot of activity at the border area is happening at the crossing all the time. The main area of focus is still the hotel in Taba. Some fire brigade from Israel succeeded to go in and help with the fire at the hotel. Also a helicopter is on the way to help with the evacuation. They are flying to Eilat.
The Israeli occupation forces killed a Palestinian gunman in southern Gaza. Meanwhile, clashes erupted between Palestinian fighters and the Israeli occupation forces in Khan el-Yunis in southern Gaza, killing 2 Palestinian resistance fighters. According to Palestinian security sources, at least 2 Israeli settlers were killed during the clashes. Today, the Israeli forces killed 2 Palestinian boys in northern Gaza. A 3rd Palestinian boy died due to injuries sustained last Friday. The Israeli occupation army has been conducting massive and violent operations, which this area has not experienced in years. According to Palestinian doctors, an Israeli tank shelled a Palestinian group of people, mainly children, with bombs containing nails. Furthermore, 2 15-year-old boys were killed while on their way to school in Beit Lahia. Following 9 days of Israeli military operations in northern Gaza, the United Nations Relief and Workers Agency UNRWA is beginning to distribute aid to residents of the besieged towns east of Jabalia refugee camp, including the devastated area of Shuja'iyya. The Israeli occupation forces bulldozed dozens of houses in the area while cutting electricity and water. The Palestinian residents of towns located east of Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza have been living under siege for the past 9 days, preferring death over such miserable living conditions. For the first time in 9 days, they were able to leave their homes to receive aid from the United Nations Relief and Workers Agency, UNRWA. People rushed to water trucks to get their share of water and quench their thirst.
Our children haven't bathed in 8 days. Tanks are opening fire, airplanes are firing missiles, and the situation is very bad. And the water has also been cut.
The emergency aid was sent by 5 trucks delivering necessary food aid, baby formula, canned food and water to be distributed to 3 besieged towns. Aid is expected to last the residents for at least a month.
How do we live? We don't have water, electricity or anything. Our children have very little to eat.
The Shuja'iyya is receiving its share of food aid. However, getting there was extremely dangerous as Israeli tanks were deployed on both sides of the road. Images of destruction were evident, especially inside the town where dozens of houses were destroyed and hundreds of citizens are now homeless. They are caught in the line of fire day and night.
The oppressive Israeli forces came in without prior warning and demolished the home. Thank God we managed to hear the bulldozers as they were coming. So we grabbed our children and fled. We have nothing left. Everything is gone. We are being massacred slowly. An entire nation is being eradicated. You can see body parts scattered on the streets. We are calling on our brothers and on the Arab nations to come to the aid of the Palestinian people.
Amid this catastrophic situation, this dove appeared to be looking for the non-existent peace. Here, in this neighborhood alone, dozens of homes were destroyed, and what remains are ruins. This is only part of the Israeli forces' aggressive measures against the Palestinian civilians, whose only fault that they are Palestinians. Hazem Badaru, Abu Dhabi Television, from Shuja'iyya, Jabalia, northern Gaza.
Palestinian children are falling victim to Israel's massive aggression against the northern Gaza Strip. Today, Israeli forces killed 2 boys, raising the death toll after 9 days of fierce attacks to more than 91 Palestinian martyrs. Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon's government vowed to press at least until next Sunday, and Hamas pledged to intensify their operations in retaliation.
2 Palestinian children were killed by Israeli fire in the northern Gaza Strip refugee camp of Jabalia Thursday as Israeli occupation troops pressed a massive 9-day-old incursion into the area. Doctors identified the latest children victims as Sulaiman Abu Ful, 12, and Ra'ad Abu Zaid, 14, and said their bodies had been ripped apart by a tank shell. The children were rummaging through the ruins of a local youth club destroyed by Israeli forces 2 days ago. A young Palestinian, 16-year-old Muhammad Abu Saif, wounded in his neck by Israeli occupation gunfire earlier this week in Jabalia, also died of his injuries on Thursday. Up to 91 Palestinians have been martyred since the Israeli military aggression against northern Gaza Strip was launched a week ago. On Wednesday, a father and his son were killed when an Israeli missile hit their house in Beit Lahia, northern Gaza Strip. The missile hit the flat while the 10-member family was sleeping. Many of them were wounded, a girl of 5 and a boy of 7 badly injured. These are the doings of Sharon, this woman is saying, what another said with historical grounds. What did these children do? They are not terrorists, she is saying. Bush supports this and no one is hearing our suffering.
This is democracy that you are like, that the British people and the American people are asking for. This is democracy.
Also on Wednesday, Israeli helicopter fired 3 missiles at a 2-story metal workshop in the town of Jabalia on the northern outskirts of Gaza Strip, wounding 3 Palestinians. Israeli officials were unrepentant about their onslaught, despite the mounting international criticism. A senior Israeli government asking not to be identified said the operation will continue as long as necessary until Israeli forces can guarantee that there will be no more rocket firing in Gaza and across the border. Israeli military sources said the army command received orders to maintain troops on the ground at least until Sunday, when Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon convenes his weekly cabinet meeting. And even if the army withdraws shortly, it will remain around the buffer zone it just carved out in the area. Hamas defiantly warned it would continue and increase rocket firing, adding that it had developed a longer-range rocket that could strike deeper inside territories occupied since 1948.
The resistance will continue as long as the occupation exists. Our occupied land is not northern Gaza. Our occupied land is all of Palestine. God willing, we will teach the Zionist enemy a lesson that they will not forget in the coming days through our attacks and our rockets. The coming days will prove for you our capabilities.
On Thursday, Hamas military wing Izzuddin al-Qassam brigade said it fired 2 Qassam rockets at Sderot, hitting a house but causing no casualties. Izzuddin al-Qassam brigade, the military wing of Hamas, said it launched 4 mortar shells on Tel Zoghra post in Rafah overnight. In another statement, Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade said it launched the first batch of missile bombs named Ababil towards the Sderot settlement overnight, hitting precisely their targets and prompting the occupation troops to open fire intensely in the air. In another statement, the brigade said one of its fighters shot an Israeli soldier manning Lindy Post, directly wounding him. For its part, the National Resistance Brigades, an offshoot of the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, said one of its units clashed with an Israeli patrol near Rafah Yam settlement at the border with Egypt.
Top U.S. Arms Inspector Charles Dulfer said he found no evidence that Iraq produced any weapons of mass destruction after 1991. Despite the findings, U.S. President George W. Bush and other world leaders who supported the Iraq invasion remained unapologetic, though their main justification for the war turned out to be wrong.
Contradicting the main justification for a war that has cost more than 1,000 American lives so far, the top U.S. arms inspector said he found no evidence that Iraq produced any weapons of mass destruction after 1991. In his more than 1,000-page report released before the Senate Armed Services and Intelligence Committees, Chief U.S. Weapons Inspector Charles Dulfer said Iraq's chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons were essentially destroyed in 1991. According to the long-awaited U.S. report, the aluminum tubes suspected of being used for enriching uranium for use in a nuclear bomb were likely destined for conventional rockets, and that there is no evidence Iraq sought uranium abroad after 1991. Dulfer's team also found no evidence of trailers being used to develop biological weapons.
The analysis shows that despite Saddam's expressed desire to retain knowledge of his nuclear team and his attempts to retain some key parts of the program, during the course of the following 12 years, Iraq's ability to produce a weapon decayed steadily.
The findings come less than 4 weeks before an election in which U.S. President George W. Bush's handling of Iraq has become the central issue. The inspector's report could boost Democratic candidate John Kerry's contention that Bush rushed to a war based on faulty intelligence. Despite the report, Bush attacked critics of his Iraq policy. He did not directly mention the report, but tried to justify the U.S. invasion by saying it was a central part of the so-called war on terrorism.
My opponent's endless back and forth on Iraq is part of a larger misunderstanding. In the war on terror, Senator Kerry is proposing policies and doctrines that would weaken America and make the world more dangerous. Senator Kerry approaches the world with a September the 10th mindset.
For his part, British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who could no more argue that the decision to invade Iraq was taken because of the threat of Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, was trying to look for other pretexts. After arriving in Addis Ababa, he claimed that the chief U.S. Arms Inspector's report showed that United Nations sanctions against Saddam Hussein were not achieving anything.
What it will show is that this is a far more complicated situation than many people thought. And just as I had to accept that the evidence now is that there were not stockpiles of actual weapons ready to be deployed, I hope others have the honesty to accept that the report also shows that sanctions were working.
Not only Blair has been trying to defend his justification for joining the US-led invasion of Iraq, but also Australian Prime Minister John Howard, who ended campaigning before Saturday's general election. Referring to the findings released in Washington, Howard said, quote, "I don't see that this report alters anything. Australia's federal election may look like a referendum on Iraq, with the government pledging to keep troops there and the opposition saying it wants them home by Christmas."
Reacting to the chief U.S. weapons inspector's report, people in Baghdad said that weapons of mass destruction issue was just an excuse to invade Iraq and topple Saddam Hussein.
Actually, I think that the US president was aware right from the beginning that Iraq has no weapons of mass destruction. It was a sheer lie, because the UN arms inspection teams had been in Iraq from 1991 till 2003, and they had left no stones unturned in all over Iraq. They searched the presidential palaces and the bedrooms of the Iraqi president.
Israeli forces have pressed ahead with their biggest and bloodiest offensive in Gaza for 4 years, killing 3 Palestinians. Palestinian medics said the teenagers, both 5 years old, were on their way to school when they were hit by army gunfire. Israeli military officials charged that the 2 were killed by an Air Force missile while attempting to launch a makeshift rocket. The deaths brought to more than 80 the number of Palestinians killed since Israel launched the offensive 9 days ago. In southern Gaza, a gun battle raged in Khan Yunis between Palestinian gunmen and Israeli soldiers. Helicopter gunships were seen circling overhead and dropping decoy flares over the area. The army said Israeli forces exchanged fire with 2 gunmen attempting to plant bombs near a neighboring Jewish settlement in southern Gaza, killing one of them. The other escaped. Prime Minister Ariel Sharon ordered the army to press ahead with the operation despite growing U.S. and international pressure as he seeks to halt rocket attacks on Israel. Political sources have said Sharon, under U.S. and international pressure to halt the offensive, would review the operation again during Sunday's cabinet meeting. But they added that he was unlikely to call it off without guarantees that Hamas rocket attacks would cease. Defiant Hamas fighters fired 2 Qassam rockets at Sderot, hitting a house but causing no casualties. The second rocket landed in an open field. Meanwhile, United Nations aid workers were handing out humanitarian aid to civilians in Gaza. Boxes of food and large containers of water were distributed to families in Jabalia refugee camp. Residents said most of their belongings were buried below the rubble of their demolished homes and said no one was looking after them.
We are now providing people with food for at least 45 days, so for some time at least they should have enough food at home.
The U.S. military has freed a top aide to Shi'ite cleric Muqtada Sadr in the hopes that the move could help the interim government's efforts to calm rebel strongholds before elections in January. Muayyad al-Khazraji was detained nearly a year ago along with other Shiite clerics close to Sadr. He was among 230 Iraqis being freed from Abu Ghraib prison this week. This was one of the main demands from Shiite militiamen in Sadr city to allow Iraqi security forces to take control of the Baghdad neighborhood. Later, Shiite militiamen announced that they would hand over their weapons as part of a peace initiative. An aide to Sadr said that in return, the interim Iraqi government must make assurances that Sadr's followers are not persecuted and aides are freed from U.S. detention. And although a few explosions could be heard across the country for the first time in months, there were no injuries or deaths reported. In central Baghdad, at least 2 rockets were fired towards the Sheraton and Palestine hotels, which house foreign contractors and journalists. There were no immediate reports of any casualties. In Pakistan, at least 40 people have been killed and more than 100 wounded in a car bomb explosion at a rally to commemorate an assassinated militant religious leader. The bomb exploded in a crowd of mourners leaving the overnight rally attended by several thousand people in the central city of Multan to mark the first anniversary of the shooting of militant Sunni Muslim leader Azam Tariq. The attack came just days after a suicide bomber killed 30 people at a minority Shiite mosque in eastern Pakistan. Information Minister Sheikh Rashid Ahmed said it could have been a sectarian act of revenge. But in an apparent bid to head off a spiral of revenge attacks, Interior Minister Aftab Ahmed Khan Sherpao called the attack an act of terrorism with no relevance to the sectarian divide. A leader of the main Shiite militant group, the banned Islami Tehrak Pakistan, denied it was a Shiite attack. He called it a terrorist act aimed at inciting sectarian war. Prime Minister Shaukat Aziz convened an emergency meeting, and the Interior Minister said he would propose a ban on large religious gatherings. Afghan President Hamid Karzai has vowed that a historic presidential election would go ahead in 2 days' time. He said the polls would reflect the people's wishes despite inevitable attempts by Taliban fighters to derail the vote. Karzai is the favorite to win on Saturday's elections, which should legitimize his rule and mark a turning point for a country shattered by more than a quarter century of war. He said in an interview that he was aware guns and intimidation would play a role in the election. Taliban threats to attack anyone connected with or taking part in the vote have not stopped more than 10.5 million Afghans of a population of about 28 million from registering directly elect their president for the first time. Women make up more than 40% of those who have registered. An additional 1.3 million refugees in Pakistan and Iran are also eligible to participate. The Taliban today repeated warnings for people to stay away from polling booths, saying fighters would do whatever they could to disrupt the vote. Still, many in the south of the country, a Taliban stronghold, said at least women would not vote. The head of the United Nations nuclear watchdog, Mohammed al-Baradei, has said he hopes Iran will fully suspend its uranium enrichment-related activities and that his agency is working with it to do just so. He spoke in Japan a day after Iran said it had processed several tons of raw yellow cake uranium to prepare it for enrichment, a process that can be used to make atomic weapons, in defiance of the UN watchdog. Al-Baradei, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, said after meeting Horiyuki Hosoda, Japan's chief cabinet minister and top government spokesman, that the Iranians were doing conversion, but they were not enriching uranium.
Paris has led the opposition camp against allowing Turkey admittance into the European Union, creating a national debate. President Jacques Chirac called for holding a public referendum in order to find out whether the French want the Turks to join the European Union or not. This is the first call of its kind to hold such a referendum in the history of the European Union. This decision was strongly criticized by the Turkish Prime Minister, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who said that it is an unreasonable precedent. The Turks criticized the French policy on the issue of Turkey's admittance into the European Union. They say that the French opposition stems from cultural differences, since many French believe that the European club must remain a Christian club.
There's still a lot of time left before the referendum will be held to find out whether the French want the Turks to join the European Union, but this extremely sensitive issue is already causing controversy among the French politicians and public. Polls show that the French nation is opposed to having Turkey join the European Union.
We have to be practical if we want to build a true and pure Europe. Then there is no place for Turkey.
This position is reflected among some French politicians. They may not be vocal about it, but they still say that they do not want to import Islam into Europe.
First of all, I'm sorry that the Christian values are not included in the European Constitution. Of course, when it comes to having Turkey join the European Union, the issue of Islam is on the table, but no one is brave enough to talk about it. In any case, I'm opposed to having Turkey join the EU.
This representative is not the only one that feels this way. This heated discussion between a large number of representatives and the French foreign minister illustrates that. He is known to be calm, but he lost his temper when he heard dozens of representatives say that Turkey is a threat to Europe.
The political map of Europe shows that Turkey is not a European country. The founding fathers who built Europe never thought to expand southward by adding Turkey to the European equation.
Some say that the secular Turkey may be able to counter this opposition by taking measures like it recently did when it nullified a criminal law that punishes women for adultery, thus enabling women to take advantage of modernity, and also by advancing human rights. Such measures will make Turkey a model for Muslim countries, and Islam may melt into European democracy. Some of the people who hold this vision is President Chirac. He considers the geostrategic depth that can be achieved by adding Turkey to the Union.
Chirac separates between issues. He says that a referendum on the Constitution will be held, and then a separate referendum on Turkey will be held. The objective is not to mix the two issues together, because that would push those who are opposed to Turkey to take on the Constitution and Europe. Europe is still an ambiguous matter to many people.
The French President Jacques Chirac wants to avoid the possibility that the referendum may become a political problem, in which the French would say no to the Constitution, no to including Turkey into the European Union, and no to his policy. So he is personally leading an unprecedented campaign in order to calm the fears of the French public from what is now known as the Turkish threat. The European Union Commission recommended allowing for discussions with Ankara in regards to Turkey's inclusion into the European Union. The Turkish Prime Minister, Tayyip Recep Erdogan, described the decision as a historical step, calling for setting a date to discuss the issue of being included into the Union.
The European Executive Commission recommended beginning membership negotiations about including Turkey into the Union, warning that starting the negotiations would not necessarily guarantee Turkey's membership into the Union.
It is clear there is a possibility that Turkey will become a member of the Union. However, the results of the negotiations, which is an important issue, is not something that is set.
The final decision on this issue will be taken in the summit that will be held by the member nations of the European Union on December 17th in Brussels.
This is not a difficult issue. We have been working on this for many long weeks. I think today we made a decision, and I am sure that we will reach consensus. Everything is easy, and I hope it will not be difficult.
However, despite Prodi's optimistic statements, Guenter Verheugen, the EU's enlargement commissioner, expects that the negotiations will be long.
It will be a long discussion. It will be a difficult discussion, but I expect a constructive discussion and positive one.
Amidst these optimistic statements, the Turkish Prime Minister, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, described the European decision as a historical step. He said that he wants the talks on European membership to begin in January of 2005 and admitting Turkey into the Union at a reasonable time thereafter.
Turkish membership will not happen overnight, but Turkey would like to move forward from this point at a reasonable time. Then, Turkey can play a role.
Erdogan called on the European Union for a positive response in Brussels to the European Commission report recommending negotiations on including Turkey into the Union. Despite Turkey's obtaining support from Brussels, Ankara has entered another waiting room before being included into the European Union. Europe will impose a long waiting period and an agreement to strict conditions, which are described by some as unprecedented and harsh. They will also impose that Ankara confirm its commitment to European laws and standards, removing all doubts before the negotiations, especially after the European Commissioner from Finland, Al-Manar, who was appointed by Verheugen as the head of the Executive Commission, stressed that the Union must adopt a more strict mechanism to monitor Turkey's commitments to the conditions. He said that Europe should focus on the net result of Turkey's record in fulfilling these conditions. The membership of Turkey, a country with a Muslim majority, will create a true revolution in the European Union. However, the long-term effects are not a source of worry to Ankara.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.